it is, the charter is not clear. And that is the entire reason that we were having this discussion about charter amendments. But I hope that nobody believes that this is purely personal and directed at one person, or purely about, charter amendments. Looking at the report, what I saw is evidence of systemic communication breakdowns, lack of oversight. No department should be in charge of investigating itself if there is an issue that is raised about that department. And it's pretty elementary, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of governance. Our charter doesn't provide for that. And so, what this boils down to is not just for now, but going into the future, what kind of oversight and what kind of checks are we going to have in place? And yeah, there's a lot of discussion about checks. Our charter does not provide the level of clarity that we need, because how many months later, 6 months later, we're still having this discussion about what the charter means.
Well, I appreciate that, and I will say that if this were purely about trying to make the city better, I wish Mr. Steele and/or the subcommittee would have honored my request to share his findings with me before a big public display, because I'm always willing to take criticism and input, and I never got that input. And so here we are, and I actually did get an independent review. I have the report right here. In the independent review, which is truly independent, found nothing wrong.
Let me ask you this question about that review.
Please.
So that review said that that attorney discussed litigation strategy with someone from your office, and so it could be inferred that that's a waiver of the attorney-client privilege, which is held by the client.
Say that one more time.
Was there permission from anyone from the city council majority to waive the attorney-client privilege to have a discussion with that attorney? I think his name is Mr. House.
That Mr. House did an audit or an investigation or a review of the case?
Right. So was there a waiver of the attorney-client privilege in order to be able to do that?
It wasn't required because he was held to confidentiality during his review, and he's entitled to review it if I commission the review.
Can anybody else waive the attorney-client privilege aside from the client?
The attorney-client privilege wasn't waived.
I don't know how you discuss litigation strategy without waiving it.
I'm not sure what you mean by that. I didn't discuss. I think you're referring to his comment that I was a part of the conversations of litigation strategy during the 10 closed sessions.
He said in his report that he discussed litigation strategy as part of the review that he conducted.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that remark.
Yeah, that's what he says in the. So my question, and I don't know the answer, that's why I'm just putting it out there. My question is, was privilege information a part of that discussion? And if so, did the council majority authorize the waiver of the privilege? All of this confusion and competing reports about what happened and what is correct and what is not correct. We don't have to go through all of this. If we amend the charter so that it is clear, we don't have to go through all of this. I don't know how many millions of dollars were spent on the Moorfields litigation. This all originated with that litigation. What I am saying is what came out of that and what came out of what I see as a conflict of interest situation is this systemic chaos and confusion, failure to communicate. We have a council that didn't feel like it was adequately informed about what was going on. And you know what? It's neither here nor there to lay blame about all of that. We just know what the situation is. The relationship is not, I think everybody agrees that the relationship is not what we would want it to be.
I appreciate those comments, and I agree with you.
That's the whole reason we're talking about clarifying it, though. Because with the example about how to interpret the charter, Section 304B says one thing about the council's authority. Section 309 says another thing about the city attorney's authority. And I am talking about the specific instance of a conflict of interest. And based on what is in the report, I just don't see any other way of resolving this other than making the charter clear. So, you know, it was a tough decision for me to decide to want to waive the attorney-client privilege and release this report, but a lot of folks came forward and said, why are you recommending a charter amendment that more carefully defines the attorney-client relationship? And this is the reason why. And so if people want to know, people want to see, I just urge them to read the report.
Well, I can't comment on that because I haven't seen the report, but I will say that there wasn't really any confusion or lack of clarity with regard to our roles and responsibilities for the 10 closed sessions that we had. The previous council never voiced any objection or concern about confusion or clarity. And we have a new council that's retroactively looking back to try to see what was done. Well, your city council made those decisions. And there wasn't any issue then with regard to representation, and with regard to my conflict, I did recuse myself.
I don't have the sense that the city council fully understood what its role was as the client.
You weren't there.
It sounds like I am reading the report that was done by Mr. Steele.
But he didn't interview the critical players. Did he interview Jill Hardy or Lynn Sameta or Patrick Brendan or Eric Peterson? Did he
interviewed the people that are still here on the council that were there.
There you go.
And their understanding, as reported by him, is that they thought that their role was to simply hear updates and approve additional requests for legal fees. And so, you know, where there's a communication breakdown, we don't blame the client. I'm sorry. We just don't do that. And so...
Nobody's blaming the client. I've advised the council not to violate the charter repeatedly, and that's my duty and obligation under the charter.
Okay,
so I'm not blaming anybody for lack of...
We'll have to agree to disagree that, you know, your assertion that what we're doing is violating the charter, we'll have to agree to disagree on that.
Then what's number 22 all about? It basically gives you the authority to hire outside legal counsel.
This is not a conversation. That's not what
No,
we're
it's a great
talking about.
conversation because it's educational for the public.
Let's deal with item 16 first, 17, which is what is the decision about waiving the privilege? Then you can see the report.
Well,
then you will know, and then maybe we can have a more fulsome discussion.
If I could request the court, if I could request the council consider releasing it to me so that I can actually view it and digest it and come back with recommendations on a response or something like that. But to just blow this up publicly without me having even seen it, Mr. Peterson, if others haven't had a chance to read it either, how are they going to make an informed vote on
No, they did.
Okay.
They did.
Okay.
They did.
Mr. Peterson had an option. He left every meeting.
So
Yeah, well,
he left the closed session meetings where we were
Closed session meetings,
briefed
we
on
were-
what the report was. So
And so, because he, shares Mr. Gates's view, which
fine.
is Mr. Peterson's right
Prerogative,
to do. But we have a disagreement about what the charter means.
We
it's
could have gone to court
fundamentally-
and gotten clarity on it in December.
Fundamentally, that's what we need to do, is gain some clarity about what the charter means.
We have met for the last year with Mr. Steele, and I know he's reached out to your attorney on numerous occasions to meet with you.
you have 6 months.
We could have, all right, less than 6 months, 7 months. We could have done this without even having this at all. So I'm just suggesting.
Mayor, I will tell you this, and this is for certain. There have been 2 occasions where I had a conversation with Mr. Steele. Both were initiated by me, and at no time did I ever decline or delay a meeting with him.
Well, he went through your attorney, so I can't
Well,
speak to
fair
that.
enough. But I had also asked at every occasion, through my attorney and directly to him, please share with me your findings.
Well, you know what's going to happen here. It looks like now it's us against them. We have factual information. This was given last year to us based on an attorney that you hired. Is that correct?
Yeah, an independent guy I had never worked with.
Okay, well.
Which is important
Which is exactly
for objectivity.
which is what Mr. Chi did for
No, but Mr.
objectivity.
Steele's different because he's advocating. You can't sit in a seat of objectivity and do an independent investigation and also advocate.
Well-
those are 2 different hats that he's wearing at the same time.
So we,
All right, go
so
ahead.
when I got on council and we had our first closed session meeting,
I remember that.
nobody was introduced as to who they were, their roles. We were asked to do something. There was no closed session memo ahead of time. We were asked at that meeting to effectively make a decision on, vote on something with very little background information on what the case was. At that point, staff started getting billing. Somebody flagged that the bills were starting to get $1 million+ for a somewhat
An
an employment
suit
suit that's not necessarily complicated.
Correct.
And then to find out that why Mr. Gates was in the room, the definition of that, and as we started to get through this and understand that, well, maybe Mr. Gates was not totally recused from that position. There was not a firewall set up. He was still directing. There are things I think in this report that folks need to read, and I think that as this report finally came out and the investigation was done, it doesn't say anybody did anything illegal. This was an operational audit, effectively. What this was to look at the operations of how this case was handled, so the council could better understand how we don't spend $1.5 million on a case, something like this, and pay out folks $2.5 million. And the recommendations out of it are for good governance. And the question was asked, why do we want to make these somewhat esoteric changes to define roles that are in the California Professional Code for attorneys and the bar rules, so that our city charter is more in line with the other cities that have elected city attorneys? And so I think that the residents need to read this and understand the why, and why this has taken so long, and why we're at the situation we are at, and to understand that at some point that when something involves the city attorney's office, the city council needs to be represented by folks that aren't in the city attorney's office that have any potential in there. So I think that Ms. Carr wants to say something, and I think we need to keep moving on until we talk to get to the later on in the agenda.